What's happening, everybody? Welcome back to the Chaplaincy on the Go podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the Fearless Family of Churches. I'm your host, Josh Zorhoff, and I'm excited to continue our conversation on emotional wellness and health in this podcast. We just finished a 6-part series talking about the dynamics of stress, but today we're going to launch into a discussion that's new. We're going to have a chance to talk with Steve Carter. Steve's a friend of mine. He's also a pastor and a speaker and an author. He is the author of a book called This Invitational Life, as well as a new book called The Thing Beneath the Thing. Steve does a lot of work in The Thing Beneath the Thing, unpacking things like triggers that we have, the places that we go to hide, insecurities that we carry, narratives that we tell ourselves, and our deep need for grace. Now, I can tell you, I have been personally impacted by The Thing Beneath the Thing. And I have worked with men and women who have also been impacted by this book. It is an incredible resource if you want to grow in emotional health or mental wellness or spiritual renewal. This book is such a helpful tool. And I'm so stoked that Steve is going to join us for a conversation about the book. And if you stay tuned to the end, there might be an opportunity for you to win a copy of the book for yourself, sponsored by the Chaplaincy on the Go podcast. I've got a couple copies here in the office, and I'd be happy to send one your way if you can follow along to the instructions at the end of the podcast. With all that being said, we're going to dive right into talking with Steve about the thing beneath the thing. All right, here we are. Steve Carter on the screen with us. Steve, is so good to have you with us. For those of you who don't know, Steve is a pastor and he's a writer and he's the author of this book, The Thing Beneath the Thing. If you're watching the video here, I've got a copy right in front of me. But Steve, tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now, and then tell us a little bit about where The Thing Beneath the Thing came from.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks so much for having me, Josh. And I just think the world of you and love your heart for conversations of this kind of manner. I mean, I think both you and I have dreamed about seeing more conversations around anxiety and stress and mental health kind of happen within the church. And oftentimes, for some apparent reason, it just doesn't. And yet, for me, the human condition, what it means to be human, and the obstacles we all face as trying to be healthy, wholehearted, surrendered, honest people. That's just always fascinated me. And it's fascinated me as a preacher, as a pastor, as a writer, and really just, I think, is for 20, 25 years, people have come into my office and just told me what's going on in their life. But nobody ever woke up one morning and just said, hey, today's the day, Steve. Today's the day I'm going to train wreck my integrity. Today's the day I'm going to self-sabotage every good relationship. Today's the day that I'm going to absolutely decimate my career. Nobody says that. And yet it happens. It happens in every arena, whether athletics, whether politics, whether pastors, whether business leaders. And I think I just got really, really fascinated with the question, why do we do what we do? And really, honestly, why do I do what I do? And that led me to kind of this conversation of the thing beneath the thing.
Wow. I think about that a little, Steve, and I'm reminded of a phone call that I got last week. It was about 11 o'clock at night, Eastern Standard Time. I was in Colorado, and so it was like 9 by me, and I was actually getting ready to go to bed, and all of a sudden my phone rings, and I'm talking to a guy who says, I'm in big trouble, and I was lying to my wife, and I got caught. And, my first question was, well, why were you lying?
Mm-hmm.
And it really gets to the heart of don't tell me about the lie. Tell me about what's behind the lie.
Yeah.
Because unless we can't talk about that, I don't know how much further we're going to be able to go. And I don't know how much healing there's going to be.
Yeah. No, I think that's such a great intuitive question to ask because, I think oftentimes in the church and in business, we're fascinated by fruit, TMZ, we're fascinated by fruit, good fruit or bad fruit. And I think what you're asking is, what is the deeper root issues? Where did this come from? And I, on a very kind of surfacey level, I remember a number of years ago, I was pitching an idea for a series that I was going to speak on, and I kind of got shut down in this meeting, and I just was so frustrated. And I went home to my wife and was just like, this guy did it again. Like, he just keeps doing this. And I was looking for a little like spousal backup about this other person. And my wife just looks at me and goes, "Isn't God so kind?" I'm like, what do you mean God's so kind? Like, this guy was a jerk. And I'm like, tell me. And she's like, well, this guy just reminds you of someone who has deeply wounded you, and you just haven't had the courage to face that.
Oh,
and
my word.
And this is the real question is today the day that you finally have the courage to face that wound? Because God cares about every part of you.
Yes.
And he's so kind that he keeps inviting you to get well. So, Steve, is today the day to get well?
Yes.
And that, like your question, well, tell me about the lie. Like, what it forced me to do is actually get into those deeper pain points and wounds.
Yeah.
And I realized, like, oh man, when we react, we're just reenacting the past. When we get hysterical, it's most often historical. And until we bring healing to that, we're going to continue to repeat the same reactions and hysterical behavior that doesn't just affect us, but it affects the people closest to us and around us.
That's so good. I spend a lot of time with clients and working in the chaplaincy, helping people understand that this is not that. Now, this may feel like that. This may seem like that. This might even be similar to that, but this is not that. And I love the idea that if you don't come to terms with the hurt that happened then, the chances of you interpreting now moments or maybe even predicting future moments through the lens of that hurt is 100%. Like, you are not even rolling the dice. You are guaranteeing that you're going to repeat that in some way. And I think, something that was interesting about that is in the beginning stage of the book, you talk about your moment of madness. And can you tell us a little bit about just how that moment wasn't really that moment, but it was all the other moments that were linking up to that moment?
Yeah. So go back to like 2008, and it's not really a great time to be selling a house in Grand Rapids, West Michigan, the big three. There were more U-Hauls that were leaving the state than actually coming into Michigan at that time. And I had taken a job in Southern California. I was doing a final kind of farewell dinner with my grandparents and my dad. And we were leaving on this December night from Byron Center, Michigan, right outside of Grand Rapids, driving down the road towards the highway when, as flurries are just dropping from the sky, and something like large hits my windshield. And it took me a second, and we're in a little Honda Civic. And so like, I kind of like slide a little bit, but then I'm like, oh man, just snow. And then I realized maybe like 2/10 of a mile, that didn't come from the sky. Someone threw that at us. And I got my wife in the front seat, my 9-month-old at the time in the back seat. It's starting to be more of a snowstorm than just flurries. And I flip a U-turn, and my wife's like, what are you doing? I'm like, someone threw that at us. And so she's like, babe, let's just go home. I'm like, no, like the injustice, like I got to find who did this. So I pull the car over, and I can see someone running in this field towards like a suburban neighborhood. And I get out of the car, leave my wife, my 9-month-old, cross multiple lanes of traffic. there's like a little bit of an embankment. I try to jump it. I realize midway, I'm not going to make it. I land in like waist high, freezing cold water. And now I'm like full on like cortisol to the max. Like I'm screaming.
You were in high stress.
Oh, bro, it was high stress. And I start chasing this guy. I run through this field, soaking wet pants. I like get to the middle of this suburban like cul-de-sac, and because I watch CSI, I know what to do. I close my eyes, and all of a sudden I hear a garage door closing, a couple doors down. I run to the house, bang on the door, and an older gentleman opens it. And he's like, "Hey, sir, can I help you?" And I'm like, "Hey, did someone just," and I'm out of breath, soaking wet pants. I'm like, "Did someone just like run through your garage?" And he's like, "Oh, my grandson did, and his friend." I'm like, "Can I have a word with him?" He's like, "Oh yeah, sure." And all of a sudden he closes the door. And it's in this moment, I'm out of breath, and I feel like this whisper from God, as if like, what's really going on? And this time I'm like a middle school pastor. So like I've worked with junior high students. The door opens and it's 2 junior high students. And I look at them and I just say, "Nice shot." And I walk away.
Wow.
And as I'm walking away back to my wife and back to my son in the car, I'm like, what was going on? And on my way to my grandparents' house, the people who were going to buy our house backed out. My dad had leukemia, and I felt terrible for leaving and taking this job, but it was the right move, and he blessed it, but I still felt bad. My grandparents were old. I didn't know if I was going to see them. I loved the church that I was a part of, and I did not know how to access all of that sadness and fear and worry about like, how are we going to sell our house? All of that until a kid gave me a chance to react and feel something.
Yes.
And I was calling a mentor, and my mentor just said, "Welcome to the thing beneath the thing, the endless discovery of what's really going on." And that phrase just became anthemic in our house. And we just realized like, oh, it's always about something else. And you got to keep interrogating the situation in that moment to realize, well, what's underneath that? What's underneath that? What's underneath that? So that you can really allow healing to happen.
And so, using your words, that snowball was a trigger to so much else. Tell us just a little bit about the thing, how you break that down, and start, with helping us understand what is a trigger.
Yeah. So, for me, like that phrase just kept taking on a life of its own, the thing beneath the thing. And as more and more people kept coming into my office, I'd keep asking them like, "Hey, tell me more about that." Or, to your point, like what, talk about that. Like what's underneath the lie? Like let's get to that. And I started to realize, oh man, there was this inciting incident. Everybody has one moment. For me, it was the snowball, that there a moment that like you either lose your ever loving mind, or you're able to slow it down, or you escape. And I just started to realize thing became this acronym. And so the first letter T was triggers, like, so we're all getting triggered, and the triggers are the setup that sets us off. And if you think about like a stand-up comedian, all they're trying to do is they're trying to get you moving in a certain direction before they surprise you. And it's that surprise and that lift that creates the laughter. But think about this with your life. You're going from point A to point B. You want efficiency, you want safety, you want control, and then enter in other person or drama or situation. And in that moment, that is the setup that sets you off.
Yep.
And what I came to realize is that the majority of people really tend to go to one of 4 places on the regular. And many of us go to multiple ones. But what I began to see, and the kind of framing idea or kind of mental prop of the book is, we both get this being in the Midwest, is this concept of potholes. And, potholes, basically there's hundreds of thousands of them in the city of Chicago. They have a whole department that just goes, inspects. And if you're listening on the West Coast, like, you don't have these, but basically potholes are created by freezing water, and the asphalt's not like our sweatpants. It can't expand, and a creator is created. And so in this moment, they just walk up to it, they check it out, they add some asphalt, they circle a little pothole tracker on the City of Chicago website, and they move on to the next one. But sometimes these potholes, there's something else underneath it. And if they don't deal with the leaky sewage pipe, some level of erosion, a pothole can become a sinkhole. And this actually happened in the city of Chicago, and multi-million dollars worth of damage to this entire city block. And I began to realize the truth is, from our pain, from our abandonment, from our own sin and choices, from the stuff that's been done unto us, we all have potholes. And what ends up happening is someone drives over one of those potholes, and it triggers us. And we have all of this like energy going through our body, this feeling. And for many of us, we're like, I just want to escape that feeling. Like in IFS language, they call it the firefighter.
Yep.
It's in that sense of, if you've got a fire in your house, the firefighter's not going, hey, do you really want that comic book? Do you want that piano? Do you want me to get that KitchenAid? Like, they're basically blitzing that whole thing with water. They don't care about what's in that house if it's not living. And I think we have these feelings, and all of a sudden we just want to put that out, which leads us often to the second letter, which is H, the hideouts.
Yep.
And that's the metaphorical places we go to escape the sadness or the pain. And the truth is, we're all addicts. We just have people who have more socially acceptable addictions, like binge watching The Bear, which is a great TV show, or eating, or even credit card debt. We have like all of this stuff that we're like, oh, but we're using it. We're using it to try and make us get more level and more regulated in ourself.
Yep.
And I love what John Ortberg says, but Ortberg says, you could have a glass of wine, but the wine's not ever going to make you become a person of peace. It will give you a fleeting sense of peace. Yep. It just will never make you a person of peace. And I think those hideouts are the places that we go that are just trying to getting a fleeting hit of peace, but it's not ever actually dealing with the underlying issues. And again, if we don't deal with those properly, a pothole can become a sinkhole.
So I think a little bit about the fact that since the pandemic, alcohol sales in Michigan, don't know about the rest of the country, but in Michigan, Beer City, USA and Grand Rapids have increased by 300%. And that number has not changed. That statistic has not changed. Even though we are now post-pandemic or endemic or whatever that means, people have developed new hideouts that have been very effective at numbing out and escaping. And then they have 3 years worth of baggage that they have not dealt with that is now coming to a head, to the point where in the US, I know this is true, that alcohol addiction rates are higher than they've ever been.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason why the thing beneath the thing is so important is because you tell people, when you're triggered and you want to hide, don't, because you're doing more damage. Because if that pothole becomes a sinkhole, that's when the real trouble sets in. A friend of mine is, as of yesterday, 2 years sober. Mm-hmm. And I sent him, a note this morning, and his wife, just to say, I'm praying for you. I am praying for you, and I celebrate you. And I know it's been a hard journey. But 2 years ago, they were in a sinkhole. And that he almost lost everything. And so for people listening who are numbing out and escaping in hideouts, you have a prayer that you end with kind of in that conversation, that first couple of chapters, called the welcome prayer. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the welcome prayer came from Father Thomas Keating and another woman. Her name is Mary Morjowski. I'm going to butcher that. I never know how to actually pronounce that. So Mary, if you're listening to this podcast, I apologize if I said your last name. But what the welcome prayer is almost these 8 or 9 lines that are an invitation to actually feel, to actually say, hey, everything that is coming my way today is an invitation for my growth and healing and health, even if it's difficult, even if I'm feeling that sense of, oh, I got to escape this. All of those feelings, when you can sit with them and hold them well and welcome them, give you the best chance to actually become whole and then spiritually healthy. And so that prayer just became something, that I said pretty much every day, 2018, even through the pandemic, because all of these emotions were just kind of coming and these feelings have movement to them. It's why they call it emotion, because if you don't know how to become aware of it and channel it, it's going to lead somewhere, and nobody drifts towards health. No, you know what I mean? You're always going to drift towards what is the easiest current to escape the hard. And this is why it's important, because every decision and every action you make, Dallas Willard would call this, there's this embodied will, this like muscle memory. And so if you come home and the first thing that you do is make an old fashioned, you are training your body, your brain, your psyche. This is what we do at 6 p.m. This is what we do every night at 6 p.m. And part of that, what you have to begin to learn is, how do I make decisions against myself?
Yes.
And learning to actually do that, and this is why, there's something with the whole CrossFit. There's something with, becoming a person that welcomes discomfort, because you're having like people who are like, I'm taking a cold ice plunge or I'm taking a cold shower. They're learning to go, how do I actually become more familiar with discomfort actually for my own health?
Yeah.
And that's just you have to almost train your brain and reframe that discomfort is actually preparation for who you will become. So sometimes, and I might have a glass of wine, and then sometimes I'm like, no, today I'm not.
Yep.
Just so I know I don't need it.
Yep.
And to make a decision against myself, so that does not become the typical muscle memory to escape the hideout.
So I hear you say that. I think about that through conversations I've had. Earlier on in our podcast, we talked a little bit about trauma and toxic stress and how COVID-19 was a global trauma. It put everybody in a place of disruption, where Bessel van der Kolk, who is a researcher in trauma, talks about the loss of agency. And that when we lose agency for prolonged periods of time, that registers on the mind, body, and soul to the same level as trauma. And so if you don't have a choice for a long time, and you don't feel like you get to make a decision, someone tells you where to go, what to wear, how far apart you can be from somebody. I mean, you go down the list of what the pandemic did. There were a lot of people who fell into the category of intense disruption, even if they don't want to say trauma. And the easiest thing to do is escape. That's the easiest, because I just don't have to deal with it. But that bill comes due always.
Yes.
And if you don't learn how to embrace discomfort, then you'll be escaping for your entire life. And that's the problem. Even when you talk about CrossFit or you talk about ice baths or anything like that, which are good to help train us for discomfort, there's another level of discomfort that we have to deal with. And that's our emotions. That's our expectations. I actually took a group of men through The Thing Beneath the Thing in a book study. And I encouraged them to memorize the welcome prayer. And I too, I say it every day. I say it every morning because I know inevitably there's going to be something that I encounter that is going to piss me off, or it's going to hurt me, or it's going to disrupt me. And if I can't learn to say, welcome, 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 I welcome everything that comes to me today because I know that it's for my healing. I welcome all thoughts. I welcome all feelings, all situations, conditions, and persons. I let go of my need for power and control. I let go of my need for survival and security. I let go of my need for affection, esteem, approval, and pleasure. I let go of my need to control any person, situation, or myself, or condition, right? I open to the love and presence of God and God's healing action within. If I can't do that, then I'm probably going to find a way to numb out.
Yes.
And I know that it's working because when I call some of my friends and I say, how you doing? They'll answer the phone and say, welcome, welcome, welcome Monday, and that I feel like for me, and I know for my friends, that was such a powerful change.
Yeah.
Because then if we can welcome it and we can sit in it, and God in our discomfort can enter into it and heal it, we don't have to hide.
Yes. Man, that's so good, because oftentimes when we have those moments of sadness or those moments of grief or those feelings, we have been trained by what we see on TV, what we've seen often in our family systems, is those triggers are permission to escape, to drink too much, to hook up, to buy, to do whatever it will take to just simmer that feeling of sadness down. But what the welcome prayer, and you so beautifully articulated, is it's not permission to escape, but it's actually this co-mission with the presence of God to go, Lord, what are you wanting to do for my own healing?
Well, that was an incredible start to our conversation with Steve Carter talking about his book, The Thing Beneath the Thing. And we unpacked some conversation pieces about triggers, and we talked about hideouts, and we talked about trauma and how all of these relate to each other. And this conversation ended with the need for this welcome prayer, to understand that sometimes when we feel triggered and we want to hide, it's important for us to actually recognize that what triggers us, we can learn from that. We can actually heal from that, but we have to avoid the desire to escape. And so we're going to continue on with this conversation in the next couple of episodes, unpacking more of The Thing Beneath the Thing with Steve. But if you've been listening in and this has been impactful for you and you learned something new, you have an opportunity to get a free copy of the book, The Thing Beneath the Thing. The first 5 people to send an email to chaplaincy@fearlessfollower.org. That's chaplaincy@fearlessfollower.org. The first 5 people to send an email sharing what you learned or what your thoughts were or how that impacted you, we will send you a copy of The Thing Beneath the Thing on us, totally covered by the chaplaincy. And we would love to continue this conversation. Keep following us for our next episode and listen in as Steve unpacks more of The Thing Beneath the Thing. If there's anything that stood out to you that was encouraging, we'd love for you to share this with a friend. Share this episode with some of the people in your life who might want to learn about triggers or might want to dive into ways that they can grow in their awareness of what's going on in their wholehearted living and life. And if you are a person who works for a company that could benefit from a conversation on emotional health or stress or wellness or mental health, we would love to help you with that. You can learn more at fearlesschaplaincy.org. You can also send us an email at chaplaincy@fearlessfollower.org. We would love to connect with you. Keep listening in and join us for our next episode as we continue this conversation with Steve Carter and the thing beneath the thing. We'll see you next time.